It begins with whispers. A rumor here, a suggestion there. Markets shifting ever so slightly, unnoticed by the average American, but sending shockwaves through the offices of Wall Street's most powerful players. In 2008, those whispers turned into a roar, and the global financial system teetered on the edge of collapse. The American dream, built on promises of stability and prosperity, was hanging by a thread. To understand how Wall Street almost broke America, we must delve into the machinery of greed, risk, and unchecked power. A perfect storm created over decades. This story is one of reckless ambition, systemic corruption, and the dangerous interdependence of capitalism's most sacred institutions. It begins in the late 20th century. By the 1980s, deregulation had become the mantra of America's financial elite. The belief was simple: let the markets govern themselves. In practice, it meant dismantling the guardrails put in place after the Great Depression, protections designed to prevent another catastrophic collapse. The Glass-Steagall Act, a cornerstone of financial regulation, had kept commercial banks and investment banks separate for decades. But in 1999, under intense lobbying from Wall Street, it was repealed. The repeal of Glass-Steagall was the green light Wall Street had been waiting for. Banks could now gamble with depositors' money, blending traditional savings accounts with high-stakes investments. This new era of financial innovation saw the rise of exotic financial instruments like mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. On paper, they were ingenious. In reality, they were ticking time bombs. Mortgage-backed securities allowed banks to bundle home loans and sell them as investments. The more loans they could package, the more money they stood to make. But there was a catch. They needed an endless supply of mortgages. Enter the subprime mortgage market. Banks began issuing loans to anyone who could sign on the dotted line, regardless of their ability to repay. No job, no income, no problem. The loans became known as ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. And as these risky loans piled up, they were repackaged and sold to investors around the world, given a stamp of approval by rating agencies that were, themselves, compromised. For years, the system worked, or so it seemed. Housing prices soared, creating an illusion of endless wealth. Homeowners were encouraged to refinance, borrow against their homes, and spend freely. Wall Street was riding high, with CEOs raking in multi-million-dollar bonuses and investors basking in the glow of record profits. The American economy appeared unstoppable. But underneath this facade of prosperity, the cracks were forming. By 2006, the housing market had peaked. Interest rates were rising, and homeowners began defaulting on their loans. The dominoes started to fall. Those mortgage-backed securities, once considered rock-solid investments, were now worthless. And because these securities had been sold and resold, the damage spread far beyond the housing market. By 2008, the financial system was in freefall. Lehman Brothers, a Wall Street giant with 158 years of history, declared bankruptcy. Its collapse sent shockwaves through the global economy, triggering a panic that threatened to bring down the entire system. Banks stopped lending to one another, fearing that their counterparties might also be insolvent. Credit markets froze. The lifeblood of the economy, the flow of money, stopped. Americans watched in horror as their savings evaporated. Retirement accounts were decimated. Millions of people lost their homes, their jobs, their sense of security. The very institutions that had promised stability and prosperity had instead delivered ruin. And yet, as the crisis unfolded, a startling revelation came to light. Many of Wall Street's most powerful players had seen this coming. Internal emails, leaked documents, and whistleblower accounts painted a damning picture. Executives at major banks had known for years that the system was unsustainable. They had joked about the garbage loans they were selling, even as they continued to profit from them. When the collapse finally came, many of these same executives walked away with golden parachutes, their fortunes intact, while ordinary Americans bore the brunt of the disaster. The government's response to the crisis was swift but controversial. The Troubled Asset Relief Program injected $700 billion into the banking system to prevent total collapse. The Federal Reserve slashed interest rates and launched unprecedented measures to stabilize the economy. Yet these actions sparked outrage. Critics argued that the bailout rewarded bad behavior, shielding Wall Street from the consequences of its recklessness while leaving Main Street to suffer. Protests erupted across the country. The Occupy Wall Street movement became a rallying cry against inequality and corporate greed. Its slogan, "We are the 99%, highlighted the growing chasm between the ultra-wealthy and everyone else. The crisis had exposed a harsh truth. The financial system was rigged in favor of those at the top. Despite promises of reform, meaningful change proved elusive. The Dodd-Frank Act, passed in 2010, introduced new regulations aimed at preventing another crisis. But Wall Street's lobbying machine went into overdrive, watering down key provisions and ensuring that many of the practices that led to the collapse could continue in some form. The banks deemed too big to fail in 2008 became even bigger, their influence more entrenched than ever. As the dust settled, the question remained, how had this been allowed to happen? The answer lies in a web of systemic failures. Politicians eager for campaign contributions had turned a blind eye to Wall Street's excesses. Regulators, underfunded and outmatched, were unable to keep pace with the rapid evolution of financial markets. And ordinary Americans, lulled into complacency by years of rising home prices and easy credit, had played their part by taking on unsustainable levels of debt. But perhaps the most damning indictment is this: the culture of Wall Street itself. In the pursuit of profit, ethics had become an afterthought. Risk was ignored, accountability was non-existent, and the human cost of financial collapse was dismissed as collateral damage. It was a system that rewarded short-term gains over long-term stability, individual success over collective well-being. The 2008 crisis was a wake-up call, but its lessons remain contested. Some argue that it revealed the inherent flaws of capitalism, a system that prioritizes profit over people. Others see it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of deregulation and the need for stronger oversight. But whatever the interpretation, one thing is clear: the events of 2008 reshaped the global economy and left scars that have yet to fully heal. Today, the shadow of that crisis looms large. The financial system has recovered, but the underlying vulnerabilities remain. Income inequality has worsened, trust in institutions has eroded, and the divide between Wall Street and Main Street has grown wider. For many, the promise of the American dream feels more elusive than ever. And so we are left with an uneasy question. Could it happen again? The answer is sobering. As long as greed and short-term thinking drive the decisions of those in power, the seeds of the next crisis will always be present. The machinery of Wall Street continues to churn, driven by the same forces that nearly brought it, and the nation, to its knees. The story of how Wall Street almost broke America is not just a tale of financial collapse. It is a story of hubris, of human frailty, of a system that forgot its purpose. It is a reminder that the pursuit of profit, unchecked by ethics or accountability, carries a cost. And it is a warning that echoes through the corridors of power, through the trading floors and boardrooms, through the lives of ordinary people who were left to pick up the pieces. As the camera pans across the skyline of Manhattan, the towering spires of Wall Street seem almost invincible. But beneath the gleaming facade lies a fragile reality. The American economy, for all its strength and resilience, is built on trust. And when that trust is broken, the consequences can be devastating. The question now is whether we have learned from the mistakes of the past, or whether history will repeat itself. For in the world of finance, as in life, those who forget their history are doomed to relive it.